Bonsoir. Bonsoir, je suis très heureux d'être ici et célébrer avec vous ce 13e anniversaire de French Connect. Bon anniversaire. Happy birthday. Good. Well, I'm afraid I'm going to speak in English this evening. I got you excited for a moment, didn't I? But my French is not as good as your English, believe me. But it is a great delight to be here because I was here 3 years ago when you began French Connect, and I remember being here in the summer, licensing Jean-Luc for the next phase of his ministry. And it's great to see so many of you here to hear the testimonies of people online and here present as well. So whether you're online or whether you're here, it's great to be with you tonight. And I want to speak tonight about these 5 key values that Jean-Luc and others have placed right at the heart of French Connect going forward. And I want to start by asking a question. And the question is, why do you go to church? What's the point? What is it that we are doing here week by week? And I want to answer that question by something that came from one of the greatest French Christians of them all, a man called Jean Calvin, who lived back in the 16th century, much better known as John Calvin. That was his real name, Jean Calvin. Calvin was a sort of Latin version of it. And he used to say that the point of the church is that it's restoring the order that was lost at the beginning. He would say that the point of the church, the reason we come to church, is to restore the creation. To bring it back to what it was at the beginning, and maybe even better than it was at the beginning. I want to take you back to the book of Genesis. You probably remember the story of how Adam and Eve are created, and they're walking in the garden. And as they walk in the garden, it's the picture we're given is a picture of harmony, of relationships that are in really good shape. There's the relationship between the human beings, Adam and Eve, and God their Father. And they talk openly with him, and God talks to them. There's no barrier between them at all. There's the relationship between each other, the man and the woman, Eve and Adam. They talk openly. There's an openness between them. There's no shame. We're told they're naked, but there's no shame or embarrassment between them at all. Then there is the relationship between them and the earth they walk on. The garden is a garden of delight, we're told. That's what that word Eden means. It's a garden of delight. And there's harmony between the human beings and the earth, the planet around them, the earth upon which they walk. It's a beautiful place for them to live. They are at peace with themselves. As Adam and Eve walk around the garden, there's no sense of brokenness. They are just themselves. They're happy. They are at peace with themselves. And then the way they speak with one another, the way they speak with God, the language they use is full of peace and harmony and gentleness. But then, of course, that's chapters 1 and chapter 2 of the book of Genesis. When we get to chapter 3, it all goes horribly wrong. Now again, you know the story of how Adam and Eve, there's a tree in the garden. And they're told, whatever you do, you can do anything else. You can eat all the fruit of all the other trees, but do not touch that tree, because that is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And if you eat that tree, you will know not just good, that's all you've known so far, but you will also know evil. But the temptation is too great for them, and together, the woman and the man, they're both guilty in this. They take the fruit and they eat. And from that moment onwards, those harmonious relationships get broken. So the relationship between the human beings and God, they were once talking openly with each other. There was no barrier between them. Suddenly, the human beings hide from God in the garden. And you always know when you start hiding from someone that that's not a good relationship. They hide from God in the garden, and God calls out, "Where are you?" And then they hide away. They're embarrassed. They don't want to appear before him. And then the relationship between them, the man and the woman, that was so harmonious and so at peace, suddenly they start blaming each other. The man says to the woman, you're the one, you took it, and you told me to eat it. And the woman said, "Yeah, but you're the one who ate it." And the relationship is broken between them. A little bit later on in the 4th chapter of Genesis, we get not just a man and a woman, but we get two brothers, Cain and Abel. And of course, brothers are meant to be friends. And yet Cain murders his brother Abel out of jealousy. And the blood falls into the ground, and the ground cries out. So the relationship between human beings is broken. And then there's the relationship with the garden, the creation in which they were placed, which was, as I say, this place of great enjoyment. But then suddenly we're told that the curse is placed upon the human beings, and not only does this serpent emerge and bites the heel of the human being, the serpent is the one who tempts them. And we're told that there's going to be enmity, they're going to be enemies, human beings and animals. They're going to fight with each other. They're going to kill one another. And we're told that the human beings from that point onwards are going to have to earn their money and their crops by the sweat of their brow. They're going to have to work really hard to enable the earth to bring forth fruit. The relationship, even with the created order around us, is broken. And then the relationship with themselves. Before, it was a relationship of harmony. They were at peace with themselves. But then suddenly, that peace amongst themselves was broken. And so Adam and Eve, suddenly when they see each other, no longer are they unembarrassed, but they're ashamed. They cover each other up. They have to cover themselves because their shame enters into their relationships. And we all know something of that, this sense of shame that all of us have in our hearts. And then their relationship with the words that they use, words of prayer to God, words of harmony with one another. A little bit later on in the story of Genesis, we read about the Tower of Babel, which is a story of human beings trying to be as good as God, building this great tower to God. And the curse that is laid upon human beings is that their language is broken and fractured into many, many different languages. Now, that's why we just don't understand each other. Yes, there's an element to that our different languages can be part of the beautiful variety of the world, but so often the fact, even when we speak the same language, we don't understand one another. We hurt each other with our words. And so you can see what's happening here. In the creation, there was this beautiful harmony between human beings and God, with each other, with the creation, with ourselves, and even with the words we speak. But then in that story, every single one of those relationships is broken. Our relationship with God is broken. And so that so often we don't even realize he's there. We think he doesn't exist. Or we think that if he does exist, he mustn't like us very much. Our relationship with each other is broken. And we know that from all the broken marriages and families and friendships that maybe we have experienced but are all over the world. We know our relationship with the creation is broken. We know about that because of the damage that we do to our world day after day as we pollute this beautiful planet we've been given. And then our relationship with ourselves is broken, that we're no longer just at ease with ourselves. We worry constantly. What do other people think of me? We're ashamed. We don't want other people to know what's really going on in our hearts. We become divided, broken people. And then our words. So often we use words to hurt each other, not to help and to strengthen each other. We just use our words in such damaging ways. Now that's a kind of picture of the world as we know it. But back to our idea. Jean Calvin, what we're doing in church is we are restoring the order of the world. We're restoring creation. That's what God is doing in the world. Now, when you think about Jesus, this is exactly what Jesus did. He restored all 5 of those relationships. When Jesus came into the world, people encountered Jesus. They couldn't help thinking that they weren't just encountering another man or just another rabbi. They were somehow encountering God. When Peter sees Jesus walking to him across the water, he says, "Get away from me, for I'm a sinful man. I'm in the presence of God here." And Jesus restored people's relationships with God. He brought them back into fellowship with God so they could talk to God. They could talk to him straight away. Jesus restored people's relationships with each other. He gathered this group of 12 people around him, the 12 disciples. And they were as different as you can imagine. You had Matthew, who was a tax collector. He was a collaborator with the Roman Empire. And then you had Judas, who was the sworn enemy of the Roman Empire, who was dedicated to undermine it. He was kind of almost like a terrorist before he became a follower of Jesus. And he brought them together into this space where they could become one. They could rebuild relationships. That's what Jesus did. Jesus restored people's relationship with the earth. So that, say, something like water. In the Genesis story, water is a great threat. We get the story of the flood in Genesis chapter 9, where the flood threatens to wipe out humanity. Water is a big enemy, and right throughout the Old Testament, water is always seen as something terrible, something that threatens human life. But what happens when Jesus meets water? What happens when Jesus treads on water? He doesn't drown, he doesn't sink into it, he walks on the water. Creation becomes a friend, it supports him. When he takes bread, he multiplies it so that it feeds everybody. So there isn't scarcity and lack, there's abundance. What we see in Jesus is that he restores people's own inner life. There are those stories of how Jesus meets people who are possessed by demons. There's one story where this man is healed by Jesus, and we're told he is clothed and in his right mind. A person who was broken, a person who was damaged, a person who was not able to hold good relationships is suddenly made whole again. And then Jesus restores even our language. You think of Peter and how Peter at the end of his life uses, or at least the end of Jesus, towards the end of Jesus' time with him, Peter's words are used to deny Jesus. And then he meets Jesus and he's restored again. And after that, after the resurrection, on the day of Pentecost, as we'll remember in a few weeks' time when we celebrate Pentecost, Peter's words are not used to deny Jesus, but to invite people back into relationship with Jesus. On the day of Pentecost, as he preaches and 3,000 people are added to the church. So that's what we see in the ministry of Jesus. Jesus restores our relationship with God, with each other, with ourselves, with the creation, and even with the words that we use. So what is our job now? What is the church about? Well, it's about these 5 things. It's restoring the world. And that's why we do these 5 things. So the first thing the church always does is, the church is the place where we find our relationship with God restored. And we find that in our worship, in our adoration. Adoration, that's the word that we use. By coming into church, gathering with God's people, being able to restore our relationship with God by offering him worship, gazing into his face, worship that is acceptable before God. That's why we come here week after week after week. It's why we sing the songs that we do, to open our hearts to God as he opens his heart to us. And as we do that, as we worship, we find our relationship with God restored. In that reading we had just a moment ago from 1 Corinthians, it depicts the early Christian gathering at Corinth. And it imagines somebody walking in off the street. So imagine someone's walking down Addison Road for a moment, and they think, oh, what's going on in there? And they wander in, and they sit at the back, and something happens. Maybe it's in the songs that something speaks to them. Maybe it's in the prayers. Maybe it's in the word of the sermon. And it says how the person walks into church and the secrets of their heart are revealed, and they fall down on their knees and they say, God is really among you. That's kind of what's meant to happen in our worship. That we feel, and even people who wander in off the streets might feel, God is really here. There's something else going on. There's a whole other dimension to life. So we worship to find our relationship with God restored. So we recognize God is really in this place. So that's the first thing we do, adoration. Second thing we do is belonging. Bonne communauté, I think is what you say here. We do belonging. If in the fall, in that brokenness of humanity, we find relationships broken apart, but Jesus bringing back people together, that's what needs to happen here in church. So we bring people together. This is a place where we're meant to find belonging. We heard so many of the people on the testimony saying how community was so important in coming here. Finding a place where you can have relationships restored and where different people can come together. People of different ages, people of different backgrounds, people of different wealth or income. The more different, the better. Because that's what we're about. We're about restoring people's relationships with one another. This is about belonging. And it's why when we come together, everything we bring matters. I love the fact that today we've already heard probably, I don't know how many people, 20 people speaking in our service. That's what it's meant to be like in church. Not just one person at the front, everybody else sitting quietly. When Paul spoke about the church in Corinth, he would say, well, when you come together, you all bring something. Somebody brings a word, somebody brings a prayer, somebody brings a song. It's a bit like, I often think church is meant to be not so much like a restaurant. You know what it's like in a restaurant? In a restaurant, you go and you sit down at the table. Somebody brings you the menu. You choose. Somebody else cooks the food. They bring you the food. You eat it. They take away the plates. They do the washing up. All you do is sit there and eat. Somebody else does everything. That's not what church is meant to be like. You just sit there while somebody at the front does all the work. It's meant to be much more like a bring and share supper, where everybody brings something. Somebody brings the meat, somebody brings the cheese, somebody brings the salad, somebody brings the quiche, somebody else brings the quiche. Everybody brings quiche when we do these things. We bring, everybody's contribution matters. That's how we find belonging, because we all matter in the church. And I'd encourage you to keep going with that sense that everybody matters, everybody has a voice. And so the church is the place where we restore our relationships with each other. Church is a place where we restore our relationship with the creation. And this is compassion. So we've got adoration, adoration, bonne communauté, compassion. Church is a place where we learn how to restore our relationship with the created order itself. And one of the things that a church always needs to be doing is not just in here worshipping, not just creating a sense of belonging to each other, but being involved in its local community, doing whatever it is that will restore something of the created order that was broken. Something I often say to churches is, well, what is broken in your community? And what needs restoring? Is it that the streets are ugly, they need beautifying with flowers and trees? Is it that there's loneliness and people need friends? Is it that there's sickness and people need healing? Try to work out what's broken in your community. What can you do to bring God's healing to that place? Where are the needs of the people that you live amongst? How can you bring practical signs of God's love and compassion that will be a picture of the restoring of creation? And then there's our relationship with ourselves. And we thought about how that relationship was broken in the fall, but then restored in Jesus. And this is what we talk about when we talk about discipleship, discipulat. Church is a place where we come to learn to live well. It's a place where we come to learn how to be restored as human beings, how to learn new habits of life. Church is a place where we don't just come to worship God, but we learn how to live well with each other. There's a writer called Dallas Willard, and he once wrote this. He said, "Imagine, if you can, discovering in your church newsletter or bulletin an announcement of a 6-week seminar on how to bless someone who is spitting on you. Or suppose the announced seminar was on how to live without purposely indulged lust or covetousness, or how to stop condemning the people around you, or how to be free of anger and all its complications. Imagine also a guarantee that at the end of the seminar, those who have done the prescribed studies and exercises will actually be able to bless those who are spitting on them, will be able to live without lust or covetousness, will be able to stop condemning people around them, will be free of anger." He goes on to say, when you teach children or adults to ride a bicycle or swim, they actually do ride bicycles or swim on appropriate occasions. You don't just teach them that they ought to ride bicycles, or that it's good to ride bicycles, or that they should be ashamed if they don't. The point he's making is that in church, it's not just a place where we come and be told what good behavior is, but we learn how to do it. We learn how to become more humble, how to become more kind, to be free of anger, to be more generous. We come to learn how to live. That's discipleship. And then, lastly, church is a place where our very language gets changed. And this is evangelism. evangelism, évangélisation, where we learn how to use our words, not to harm people, not to damage people, but to bring people back into fellowship with God. That's why you do the Alpha course, which is a brilliant way of just explaining something about the Christian faith, using words to help people understand the God who loves them, to give them that invitation that they might be brought back into fellowship with Jesus. So there is our five things that are the heart of every single church. It's why we do church, restoring the creation, restoring our relationship with God through adoration, restoring our relationship with each other through belonging, bonne communauté, restoring our relationship with creation through compassion, getting involved in our local community, restoring our relationship with ourselves by learning how to live well the way God wanted us to live, and restoring our relationship even with our language, our words, by using them to invite others into fellowship with God. Now, this is how we are meant to live. It's how we flourish as human beings in relationship with God, with each other, with the creation, with ourselves, and with the words that we speak. One last thing before I close. The great St. Augustine, one of the greatest Christian thinkers of them all back in the 4th and 5th centuries, he used to write about how each one of us as human beings, every single human being, has a kind of dim memory of what life was like in the beginning, when we were in harmony with God, in harmony with one another, in harmony with the creation. We were at one with ourselves and even with the words that we use. We've got a dim memory of what that was like. We don't experience it right now because all those relationships are broken. But when people encounter those things, when they encounter a community that gives them a taste of a restored creation, it just triggers the memory. Oh, that's what it was. That's what I'm looking for. That's what I've always been looking for. A restored relationship with God, a restored relationship with people, a new relationship with the creation, a new wholeness within myself, a new way of using language. So that is what I pray for you at French Connect, that as you come here week after week, you will find all of these relationships restored. You will find yourself flourishing as a community and as individual human beings. And that as you invite friends and people here to this community, it will trigger a memory that they will know this is what they've been looking for all their life, that they will be drawn back into fellowship with God. And then when we come back for anniversary number 4, number 5, number 6, all into number 10, there'll be many more people here giving thanks for all that God is doing in French Connect. Amen.